I think from my perspective, as director of the National Security Agency, we have a couple missions. We collect foreign intelligence for our country, and we provide information assurance for national security systems. So we have two great missions, and those missions provide us some tremendous capabilities. And it stems back, it's kind of interesting, we're here in the museum from where NSA started 61 years ago. When you think about it, what happened during World War II, Enigma, and there's an Enigma machine right there behind me, and you can see this, the Bomba system that the National Cash Register and the Navy helped put together that broke the German codes, helped us win the war in the Atlantic, helped us understand what the Germans were trying to do. And there's further down the hall, there is some intercept equipment that we had on the Japanese red and purple codes that allowed us to break those communications. We're key at Midway, and there's a great wall diagram about Midway. That's where NSA started. We built capabilities to break their communications and built capabilities to secure our own, SIG-ABA and SIG-SALI. These are tremendous capabilities. We have those types of people today. What is the adversary doing? What do we need to know, and how do we bring that together? They're great linguists, great analysts, great technical people. On the NSA side, we have almost 1,000 PhDs, a little over 1,000 mathematicians, and over 4,000 computer scientists. So the foundation for technical expertise for operating in networks. That's what our nation has here. And that does it for two ways. It allows us to see how the networks operate and what the vulnerabilities are to benefit our country and to protect our systems. So back in 2008, there was an event in our networks, and the Secretary of Defense at that time, Secretary Gates, looked at what was going on and saw that NSA was the foundation for that expertise. And he also saw that we needed to take, at that time, what was the Joint Functional Component Command Net Warfare and the Joint Task Force Global Network Ops, the offense and the defense, and bring them together under one commander. So on, I think it was 11 November 2008, I had gained operational control of the Joint Task Force Global Network Ops, and then those two entities would become Cyber Command. And the reason that we put those two here was to leverage the tremendous capabilities that NSA has and ensure that this team operated as one team, not two on the same networks. Absolutely important for our country. And I think that team has grown and is superb today. I think the most beneficial way to articulate this question for the Defense Department and the American people is to look at what NSA does to protect this nation from terrorist attacks, and then we can extend it into other areas. So if you think about what's happened in terrorist attacks and the ability to collect terrorist communications globally, NSA is one of the key intelligence collectors on those problems that we have. And you see some of this in the papers, but you can look at what happened in 9/11. NSA was intercepting parts of those communications in Yemen, had a great understanding of that network, but could not see in the United States. Based on our laws and the way it was put together, we couldn't collect, didn't see that other end, and that's where Midar, who was in San Diego, was one of the leaders who flew the American Airlines Flight 77, I think it was, into the Pentagon. We couldn't see that. So a couple things have transpired. First, that's the business record FISA, the ability to do call detail records or the metadata program, so we can now take what we know from foreign intelligence, understand what the terrorists are trying to do, and look at what's going on in the United States and say, here, FBI, are some key numbers you need to look at. I think that is absolutely critical for our country. How do we stop terrorist attacks? Now, the other program that kind of comes to that really shows our true capabilities is it's not just the United States that we help protect. We revealed the fact that the 702 and 215 programs, the metadata and content programs that we have, actually help our allies more than it helps us. We talked about 54 different terrorist-related events. Those are plots, financial transactions, and other things that are key for terrorists to make things happen. NSA actually uncovered 13 that dealt with specific events in the United States, 41 overseas, 25 in Europe. So of that 41, 25 were in Europe. So what NSA can do is see where those communications go and tip that to the local law enforcement or intelligence agency so they can go do something. And how did we learn that? Well, if you go back to Iraq and Afghanistan, this is where our capabilities really grew. What we were able to do in Iraq to protect our troops, General Dave Petraeus will tell you, was one of the greatest things that has ever happened. It helped squash the insurgency that was going on by the data that we released, and allowed he and the troops there to pick up a lot of adversaries. And it actually turned the tide for us. So given those capabilities and the ability to see how these networks actually work, they operate, how terrorists move information, has allowed us to go after them around the world. Now, we're only part of the intelligence community that does that. You have CIA and FBI. FBI is a tremendous partner here in the homeland. They do great work. Our job is to give them the information that we see coming from overseas into the United States. So, NSA is a tremendous foreign intelligence capability that has the ability to see things that are going on in the United States and help people really understand what that means. You know, FBI is pretty busy. They got a lot of stuff going on. But if you see something that's critical and we can tell them that piece of information is critical, go after that first, that helps them. It helps us. And we released the Najibullah Zazi case from Denver, and how we only had 7 or 8 days. We gave a tip to the FBI and they were able to break that, and the attack was going to occur, I think, 8 days after the first tip. So that's pretty fast when you think about what they had to do, chase this guy across country, shut down the people in New York and do all that. Would not have been possible without these programs. And we got it not from collecting inside the United States, but from what we were seeing overseas. And I think that's what people miss. We're a foreign intelligence agency with great insights as to what's coming into the United States. Because America, the United States, runs on cyber. You know, we do our banking online. We have everybody has iPhones, you have iPads, you have computers, computer networks. The finance industry runs on computer networks. We have the power runs off of data systems. Just about everything in our lives runs on computer networks. And most of those are not as secure as they need to be. And we are seeing, and if you look at over the past year, in 3 months, about over 350 distributed denial of service attacks on Wall Street. And we've seen destructive attacks against Saudi Aramco in August of 2012. And we saw destructive attacks against Rosgas in 2012, August. The one against Saudi Aramco wiped the data and destroyed the content of the data on over 30,000 computer systems. And then a similar impact on South Korea in March and again in June of 2013. So we see distributed denial of service attacks going on. We see a lot of exploitation of intellectual property, theft of intellectual property, theft of your Visa, MasterCard type data, your Social Security numbers, all of this. And we see disruptive and destructive attacks coming. All of that impacts the operations of cyber. So how do we fix that? That's the issue in what cybersecurity deals with. From my perspective, there's a couple things that you have to do. First, we should build a defensible architecture and have a way of securing our systems. If you think about the way your phones and your iPhone, do you have an iPhone or? You have an iPhone. Okay, so they're great, right? And you get to do neat things on it, and you probably got all these apps that you can do. The problem with the iPhones and all the current phones is they're not as secure as your landline system. But we would like to use those for iWallet, right? And for banking and for all these other things. So we've got to secure that infrastructure. So there are things that we have to do to fix the phones, and the vendors are going to work that. There are things that we have to do to fix our infrastructure, and we all have to work that. And then there are things that the adversary is going to try to do to steal intellectual property. We have to defend against that. And then to disrupt our communications or destroy our communications infrastructure. It's in those last two, it's actually across that spectrum where NSA and Cyber Command come together. NSA, think of that as the indications and warning and situational awareness for cyberspace. They're the ones that can see it. Just like we do terrorist communications, you can see malicious software out there. And Cyber Command is the one who would respond to it. That's the platform for defending the DoD networks, defending the nation, and responding, as policymakers would ask us to do, if someone were to attack us. Well, first, they aren't spying programs. So I would correct the title of them. These are, one is called the Business Records FISA program, or Section 215, and the other is called the FISA Amendment Act 702, or PRISM. And these are capabilities that help us defend this country from terrorists and other things. Specifically on the business record FISA, the metadata program, perhaps the most misunderstood program there is. The question is, would you agree if we could have stopped Madar by having metadata, or the information on a to and from number, just a number, the date, time group, and the duration of the call, and that's all we have. We don't have any names or any content. We put that in a database, and so when the guy from Yemen calls Madar, we can put that in there and see that that guy is that number. A guy from Yemen is calling that number in the United States, and we give that to the FBI, and then they can go through the right process, whether it's through court orders or through national security letters, to figure out who is in San Diego doing this. Would that make sense to you? Okay, so if that makes sense, the question is, you need data to do that. So the metadata program says, let's take all this information and put it in a data repository. NSA, you're authorized to look at that only when you have a communications from Al-Qaeda or associated groups. And so when NSA comes up with what we'll call a reasonable articulable suspicion that this phone number, foreign, is talking, or domestic, is talking, is first a Al-Qaeda related, and is talking to someone in the United States, we can go look at that. And then we take that data and see if it touches anything else that we know about the terrorists. If we find something, we give that to the FBI. We don't know who it is. We don't know the content of the communications. We just know there's something there they should go look at. FBI can then take that information and go see what's happening there and what they need to do. That's first part. The second program is the PRISM. PRISM is a little bit different. PRISM is a content program. It has to be one on foreign, not on US persons. So for 702, what we're doing is we're looking at a terrorist who is communicating, for example, to someone, and we know they use a certain type of service provider. We see that guy someplace in Pakistan or Afghanistan or someplace around the world. We say he's associated with this terrorist group. We're allowed to go to the service provider with a court order and get the content of that communications. That's how we found Najibul Azazi. If we didn't have that program, we wouldn't have gotten it. This is a huge capability for our country. Now, the key part, what people miss, is the first thing is they're collecting all that data. Well, I explained how important the constraints are on this data set, but there's more. The oversight and compliance on these programs is greater than any other program in our government. It's from within NSA by the General Counsel, the Inspector General, the Oversight and Compliance Directorate, from the DNI's General Counsel and Inspector General and Civil Liberties and Privacy Officer, by DOD's Inspector General and General Counsel, by Department of Justice, by the White House, and by Congress, both committees. And so when you look at that, these are ones who apply oversight and can see what we're doing. It is not a program that's secret. It's one that Congress, the administration, and the courts have all approved. And the court is the final one in this. So from my perspective, we have convinced all three of those that this is necessary for the security of this nation. And we have not had any willful or knowing violations of those programs, period. There have been in other programs, but not in those two courts, the ones that you bring up. So, who are they spying on? You call them spying programs. You see, people say they're spying on Americans. That is absolutely wrong. We're going after terrorists with those programs. And so the question is, it has been successful. Can somebody come up with a better way of doing it? That's the issue. We've not been able to come up with one, so we've been working with Congress and the courts, but that's the best we can do right now. We protect civil liberties and privacy, no content in the metadata program, and I think that's the right way to run it. You see, nobody's come forward with a better. It's like saying we know how, it's like when you were younger, well, this is for boys. When you're younger, you say, I don't want to take a bath. I say, no, I'd never take a bath. Why do you want to take a bath? Well, you got to take a bath, cleanliness, da, 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 da. I say, but isn't there a better way? Well, we don't, so we had to take baths, right, or showers. What about here? What's the better way to stop terrorists? Now, the other part is somebody says, well, shouldn't you have released all this data? I don't believe so. You see, if we could only give it to the good guys and tell them to keep it secret, then yeah, give it to all the good guys. The problem is the bad guys are amongst us. They will figure it out. This happened in 1998 after the East Africa embassy bombings. Somebody revealed publicly that the way we tracked bin Laden was through CYCOM communications. Within 2 days, we never saw bin Laden in communications again. My concern is the revealing of these programs allow terrorists to know the best weapons that we have against them. It will cause irreversible and significant damage, and it means that terrorists now have an upper edge in conducting attacks, probably in Europe and potentially in the United States, and our ability to stop them is reduced. And so when people die, those that are responsible for leaking it are the ones who should be held accountable. It's lessons that we learned after 9/11. When you look at the 9/11 Commission, it faulted the intelligence community for not connecting the dots. We didn't have the tools. These are tools that help us connect the dots. So we can take them away and forget the lessons of 9/11 at our own risk. I recommend we do not do that. We have learned that lesson once. We all vowed this would never happen again, and we should commit to that course of action. Now, I do believe if we can find a better way, we ought to put it on the table and take those steps. So anybody who's got a better idea, let's put it on the table. But to say stop ignores the lessons that we learned in 9/11, and that would be absurd. And I think then people should look at us and say, we're accountable because we failed the nation. We already knew it wouldn't work. And so we have a responsibility here. I liken this to holding a hornet's nest. Okay, so here we are, we're holding this hornet's nest. Now I would like to give it to somebody else and say, you protect the nation with this data set. Everybody's looking around and saying, I don't want to hold that. You hold it. But somebody's got to hold it for the good of the nation. And remember, the oversight and compliance we have here is better than any other program ensuring our civil liberties and privacy and that of our allies. We do it better than anybody else. So despite what the papers say in here, we do it better than anyone. And I think what's happened is the papers convolute these stories and they immediately say 70 million, think of this, we got one today about 70 million phone calls that are being intercepted in Paris over a 1-month time period. Think about that, 70 million phone calls. Now, I don't know how many phone calls you get a day, let's say 30. But let's say they're in a foreign language, because most French people speak French. Just putting that on the table. It's not a hard thing to follow. It's not complicated. So you'd need French linguists. And if you did 2 million French phone calls a day, listened to them, and tried to write them down, how many people would that take?
A few more than 2.
Yeah, a few more than 2. So, you know, the average analyst might be able to do 1 every 15 minutes, 4 an hour times 8 is 32. Divide 32 into there, you're going to need about, you know, a little bit less than 100,000 people just for France. And France is an ally. It's absurd. They get it wrong. It actually has nothing to do with collecting on France. But the reporters who got this see this data and quickly run to the wrong conclusion. And that's wrong. I'm concerned that what they're doing will do grave harm to our country and our allies. So we got to figure out how to fix that. Well, the other part is, I think it's wrong that newspaper reporters have all these documents, 50,000, whatever they have, and are selling them and giving them out as if these, you know, it just doesn't make sense. We ought to come up with a way of stopping it. I don't know how to do that. That's more of the courts and the policymakers, but from my perspective, it's wrong. And to allow this to go on is wrong. Well, I started out with the lessons we learned in Iraq and Afghanistan. You know, one of the proudest moments of my tenure here as the director of NSA and as commander of Cyber Command is what we do to support our troops forward with actionable intelligence. In 2005, we made a commitment to push forces into Iraq and Afghanistan. And over the last 8 years, we've deployed more than 6,000 people. 22 cryptologists have lost their lives. And I think it's for a noble cause to ensure our troops forward, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and civilians have the intelligence they need to fight and win and to survive and come home. That's our job. That's what we do for the Defense Department. But there's more. Wait, it's like a Ginsu knife. There's more. We also do network security, information assurance, and ensure their networks are secure. So both of those missions are what we do for the department and for our nation. And we partner with our allies to help protect them and work together as a coalition. I think all of that's absolutely superb. I came out of, I had a chance to go to Iraq or Afghanistan last weekend, a week ago, to see our folks there. They do great work, absolutely superb. And it's the force protection that you'd expect. And our allies are just as good. I think the most impressive is what Cyber Command is doing to stand up the command, train the folks. So there's 5 key things that they have to do. First, if you think about it, we need a trained and ready force. So building out the teams and training the teams is the most important thing we're doing. And working with the services, our objective is to train about 1/3 of the teams in 13, 1/3 in 14, 1/3 in 15. They're making tremendous progress. The second, how do you see cyberspace? You know, and if I were to ask everybody in the room here to paint a picture, draw a picture of what they see from a cyber attack, everybody would give a different picture. So we don't have intellectually a way of thinking about how cyber situational awareness looks. So we need to build a cyber common operational picture. Third thing, active defense. How do you defend your networks? I would assert that the current architecture for our networks is indefensible. We have 15,000 enclaves in DoD. An enclave is a part of a network that has its own network firewalls and system administrators, 15,000 of those. And so what you have is little pockets, and each one of those has to have the right level of patching from vulnerabilities, the right standards put in, and everything has to be done exactly right. And when a new one comes out, it has to go to all 15,000. They all have to fix it. What do you think the probability that that runs 100% of the time, 100% of the time? 0. That's right. And so I think that's one of the main reasons we've got to go to the Joint Information Environment, a thin virtual cloud. Command and control. I think the actions that we've taken on command and control with Cyber Command is in the right venue. I think bringing this together, working with the services, we're walking down. The last thing, authorities. How do we get the authorities to work with industry so that we know when the nation is under attack and we can respond appropriately and those kinds of things? That's where legislation and other authorities are needed. Well, first, get the facts. You see, what's happened is the first step. I'll give you a great case in point. I was reading something today that said there were 2,776 privacy violations by NSA in 2011. You know, that was one of our reports, or 2012. That's not correct. Those were incidents, compliance incidents. Over 2,000 of those were something called roamers. Now, I pronounced that rumors when I had my dental surgery, and they thought I said rumors, but it's roamers. You know what a roamer is? Well, you have an iPhone, right? If you go from one area to another, you're roaming, right? And if a foreign adversary who we're tracking comes into the United States, we're not authorized to collect that phone in the United States. So we have to stop collection on that phone and report it to the court. That's not a compliance violation. It's something they've asked us to track. Over 2,000 of that 2,776 were those. Now there were compliance violations, and those could be we typed in the wrong number, we didn't know that person in a foreign country was a dual citizen, things like that happen. So every time we make a mistake or we track something by the court, we report it. So if the court says track these, we track these and we report them. So what happens to people who get that data, they say, this must be all privacy violations. Less than 6% of those even dealt with US people. But everybody jumps to the conclusion, well, it must deal with US people. Look at all these things they did against that. No, we track any violation we do any place across our whole spectrum, foreign or domestic. And so part one is they got to get the facts, if I were to say things. Two, let's go back to how they started. These programs were started to defend this country. If you have a better way, put it on the table. If you don't, let's discuss it, but don't stop protecting. It's like saying, well, we're not sure seatbelts protect people anymore. Nobody has to wear seatbelts, right? What would you say to do you have children? Yeah, so if they said, okay, just put them in the back, you wouldn't do it, would you? You wouldn't go back, but you see, we've learned that lesson on how we take care of our people. These programs help us take care of our people. And we shouldn't stop doing it. We should try to improve them. If we can come up with a better way, do it. Well, I think there's two things that we need to understand. First, this is the team that works together to defend this country from terrorists and cyber attacks. Those are the things that can hurt our country easiest. You know, most countries can't bring a division and put it on our border, a military division. So what can they do to hurt us? Terrorism and cyber. NSA is foundational to both, and Cyber Command was built to help defend this country in cyberspace. Operates all in the communications environment. We have tremendous oversight and compliance rules. We send our people through multiple courses to ensure they know how to protect U.S. persons, civil liberties and privacy, and ensure that of our partners. And from my perspective, when you put all that on the table, what that says is we've got a great framework. We do this better than any other country. You know, we're taking this beating in the press because of what these reporters are putting out, but the facts are we do it better than anybody. Now, would I stop doing any of that? Well, there's policy decisions that policymakers can do, but nobody would ever want us to stop from protecting this country against terrorists, against adversary states, and against cyber. From my perspective, that's what we need to focus on, and that's what we're trying to do. And then the National Intelligence Priority Framework adds to that. That's where the policymakers come in and say, here's what we want you to do. That's how we do our collection. It is based on that policy framework that the national community comes up with. So I think when you think about NSA, here's what I think about. These are the best, most noble people in the world, from my perspective. They come in every day thinking about how they can protect this country, how they can do it better. And no matter what people say about them, they're here every day, and they do more to save our lives than anybody else that I know of. And they don't ask for any kudos, they just do their job. One of the former presidents said, they're the soldiers of the intelligence community, and they truly are. And the good part about putting Cyber Command right beside them is they are learning how to do compliance and oversight. All of these things are running together. I think it's absolutely superb. And by bringing that together, our nation, Team Cyber, is better protected than it would ever be. Great people doing a great job. They're the heroes. It should never be a question in anyone's mind. This leaker is not a hero. He will have caused lives. I think that's irresponsible and significant damage to this nation, irreversible and significant damage. And that will come out eventually. But the people who are protecting us, those people of NSA and Cyber Command, they're the heroes. And they're the ones that deserve the kudos from the American people. I think I would jump forward into the future, far enough forward that you could see what are the medical improvements that we've made, so you could bring those back in time and see how you handle things like cancer, Lou Gehrig's disease, Alzheimer, and the diseases that plague us. There ought to be a way to fix some of these. I would love to jump forward, bring that technology back. And it seems that we're pretty close on some of these. You look at what the National Cancer Institute and others are doing, they're making tremendous strides. But people are still dying, and I think we could fix that. So that's what I would do.